She just wanted to buy a car as a gift for her sister. But her appearance became a cause for ridicule and humiliation. The next day, her husband came to the car dealership, and everything changed. Subscribe and tell me where you're watching from. The morning sun filtered through the tall windows of the Ashford Auto Gallery, casting golden streaks across the glossy showroom floor. Polished chrome and deep lacquer finishes gleamed beneath the strategically placed spotlights. Each car posed like a sculpture, exotic, powerful, exclusive. The dealership was one of the most prestigious in Atlanta, known for its custom electric SUVs and luxury imports, where names like Lucid, Range Rover, Autobiography, and Mercedes-Maybach lined the pristine white-tiled floor like royalty on display. The showroom exuded wealth and exclusivity, and the staff moved with the quiet confidence of those who understood they weren't selling transportation, they were selling status. Rasel Jennings adjusted the cuff of his tailored navy blazer as he walked along the row of gleaming vehicles, nodding in approval at the reflection of his own figure on the side of a new electric Cayenne Turbo GT. The showroom wasn't open to just anyone. This was a curated space, and Rasel liked it that way. He prided himself on being able to size up customers the moment they walked through the door. It wasn't just about intuition. It was experience, he told himself. Years of knowing who could and couldn't afford the sticker price before a word was spoken. He had a method. He'd watch their shoes first. Real leather was easy to spot. The walk. Did they move like they owned space, or like they were borrowing it? Then the wrist. Nothing said money like a timepiece that whispered, not shouted. Rolex, Patek, even the subtle elegance of a Grand Seiko. But if a customer walked in wearing sneakers with peeling soles and a hoodie, fantasy browsers, time wasters, dreamers. So when the glass doors slid open and a tall black woman stepped inside wearing worn Nikes, gray leggings, and an oversized beige hoodie, Rasel barely twitched. She looked around briefly, her hand resting instinctively on the small of her back, where her body curved outward with the unmistakable roundness of pregnancy. Her face was calm, eyes alert, focused. Not timid, but certainly not the profile of someone about to drop 6 figures on a high-performance electric SUV. Rasel glanced at his smartwatch. He had a 1 p.m. appointment with a real client, some tech startup guy looking for a fleet. No time to humor a browser. Still, professionalism had its protocols. He approached, wearing the polished smile he reserved for people he didn't plan to spend much time with. "Welcome to Ashford Auto Gallery," he said smoothly. "Is there something I can help you find today?" The woman returned his smile, though hers was softer, almost absent-minded. "Yes," she said, "I'm looking for an electric SUV. I saw one online, the Lucent Valkyrie, midnight silver. You had it listed as just delivered." Rasel blinked, and for a moment the name of the car forced a pause. The Lucent Valkyrie was one of the newest models, starting at just under $160,000. Fully customizable and already on a 6-month wait list in most of the country. This was no casual family crossover. This was a statement car. "Yes," he said, drawing out the word, "that model is certainly impressive. You said you saw it online?" She nodded. "I'd like to see it in person if possible." He hesitated, glancing toward the far side of the showroom, where the Valkyrie was displayed on a rotating platform under cool blue lighting. Its lines were sleek and sculpted, the color shimmering faintly between deep silver and slate, depending on the light. It was a car that demanded respect. "I see," he said. "Well, it's not part of our standard floor tour. Most clients who inquire about the Valkyrie usually schedule private viewings. It's a very exclusive vehicle. She tilted her head slightly, clearly picking up the tone. I'd still like to see it, if it's not too much trouble. He glanced down at her shoes again, scuffed, not just worn, used. Her hoodie looked comfortable, not expensive. No ring on her hand, no watch, no bag from a designer store. Just a woman, casually dressed, asking to see the most expensive car in the showroom. Of course, he said, already calculating how to minimize the interaction. But before we proceed, might I suggest taking a look at our certified pre-owned selection? We've got a few earlier Valkyrie models in excellent condition, far more affordable and still very reliable. The smile faded from her face, not with offense, but with understanding. She had seen this before, many times. I'm not looking for used, she said gently, just that one. Well, he said with a tight chuckle, unfortunately, that specific model is part of a limited exhibition. But if you're serious about exploring purchasing options, I'd be happy to schedule a formal consultation for another day. We do prioritize clients with appointments for certain models. Behind him, a younger employee, Jason, stood frozen near a digital kiosk. He had watched the exchange from a distance, uncertain whether to intervene. Jason had only been working at Ashford for 6 months, but already understood the unspoken culture. Don't contradict senior sales staff, especially Rasel. Still, the discomfort on the woman's face twisted something in his gut. She looked again at the Valkyrie, then back at Rasel. I understand, she said, nodding slowly. Her voice was even, but something in her eyes dimmed, just a little. Thank you. She turned and began walking toward the exit. Jason stepped forward, a hesitant movement he aborted halfway. She didn't look back. When the doors closed behind her, the silence in the room thickened for a second. Rasel exhaled through his nose and shook his head. They watch a few videos online and think they're ready for the real thing, he muttered to no one in particular. He turned to Jason. If you're done gawking, we've got actual clients coming in. Prep the Valkyrie bay. Jason didn't answer. He just nodded, his face tight. Outside, the woman stepped into the sunlight, pausing on the steps just long enough to draw in a slow breath. She rested her hand again on her lower back. A moment passed, then another. Then she reached into her hoodie pocket and pulled out her phone. She tapped the screen, made a call. The voice on the other end answered almost instantly. Hey, she said. Yeah, I'm fine. Just ran into a bit of predictable treatment at the dealership. She listened, then smiled slightly. No, don't be angry. Honestly, it was almost educational. She looked back at the gleaming glass facade behind her, where a car she was more than capable of purchasing sat behind velvet ropes, guarded not by walls but by assumptions. I think we should go with Plan B. She ended the call, tucked her phone away, and walked to the black SUV parked in the lot. The license plate didn't reveal much. Government issue, no vanity statement, no flash. She climbed in slowly, carefully, and closed the door behind her. Inside, silence. Outside, the city buzzed with energy and noise, but in the Ashford Auto Gallery the day continued without a hitch. Sales continued. Polished shoes clicked against polished floors. The customers they welcomed looked the part, and for now, that seemed enough. No one knew yet that a quiet storm had passed through, and it would return. Not with noise, but with purpose. The morning air in Atlanta was crisp and cool, the sky an unbroken stretch of pale blue as sunlight danced across the polished facade of the Ashford Auto Gallery. Inside, everything gleamed. floors buffed to mirror perfection, vehicles dusted and positioned with architectural precision. The scent of leather, chrome polish, and coffee hung subtly in the air, familiar to every member of the staff. It was another day to sell luxury, another day to reinforce the exclusivity of what they offered. Rasel Jennings moved with purpose. His navy blazer was freshly pressed, the Windsor knot of his silk tie flawless, and his shoes reflected the showroom lights with mirror-like precision. He had arrived early, as he always did, and walked the floor with the proud gait of a man who believed he had mastered his domain. The incident with the woman the previous morning had already faded from his mind, relegated to the mental category of harmless nonsense. She had been no different from countless others he had quietly dismissed over the years, people who wandered in, misreading the kind of space they were in, imagining that window shopping was enough to be taken seriously. As he addressed the staff during the brief morning meeting, he leaned casually against the Lucent Valkyrie's presentation platform, speaking with his usual mix of authority and smooth charm. "Remember," he said, making eye contact with each person in turn, "we're not here to waste time. We cater to a specific clientele. There's a reason these vehicles are displayed behind ropes. They're not for browsing. They're for buying, and our job is to identify the buyers." The younger employees nodded dutifully. Some, like Jason, seemed more subdued than others, but no one challenged him. They rarely did. He was, after all, the dealership's top closer, the one who'd brought in the highest commissions for 3 years running. His instincts, he often reminded them, weren't just good. They were exceptional. The meeting dispersed and staff returned to their stations. Rasel took a moment to check his schedule. The afternoon was booked solid. At 1 p.m., a startup executive and his CFO were arriving to discuss a potential fleet deal. 5 vehicles minimum. Rasel had spent days preparing for that one. Everything else was background noise. Then, at exactly 10:18 a.m., something caught his eye through the wide front windows. A vehicle pulled up to the dealership's private valet circle. Not just any car, but a long, sleek black SUV with a gleaming finish and diplomatic tags. The doors were tinted, the wheels custom. The air around it seemed to still. The engine shut off. A uniformed chauffeur stepped out, adjusting his gloves with precise, practiced movements. He walked to the rear door and opened it with the kind of ceremony reserved for heads of state. From the back emerged a tall man, stately in presence, dressed in a charcoal gray suit that fit him like it had been cut by hand in Milan. His shoes shone, not from polish, but from quality. His tie was a dark blue silk, understated. His skin was a smooth, deep brown, his hair close-cropped and peppered with silver at the temples. He walked with unhurried confidence, surveying the dealership not like a customer, but like someone arriving to inspect his investment. Rasel was already moving to intercept, senses sharpened. He didn't recognize the man, but he didn't need to. Everything about him radiated wealth, the quiet kind, the kind that didn't need to be announced. His instincts flared in a different direction now. This man was a golden prospect. "Good morning, sir," Rasel said as he approached, offering his most polished smile. "Welcome to Ashford Auto Gallery. Rasel Jennings, sales manager. It's an honor to have you with us." The man regarded him with an unreadable expression before returning the greeting with a firm handshake. "Dr. Elijah Weston," he said simply. Rasel's mind scrambled. The name sounded familiar, though he couldn't place it immediately. Still, he smiled wider, gesturing toward the showroom with a flourish. "It's a pleasure, Dr. Weston. We'd be delighted to show you around. Are you looking for something in particular today? Perhaps our newest Valkyrie?" Elijah Weston didn't follow the gesture. He stood firm, hands in his coat pockets. "I'm here about a specific vehicle," he said, "the Lucent Valkyrie in midnight silver." "Excellent choice," Rasel said at once, already turning slightly to lead the way. "She's a beauty. Would you like to step over and—" "My wife was here yesterday," Dr. Weston said, his voice quiet even. Rasel stopped mid-step. He turned back, his smile tightening. "Oh? I'm not sure I recall. She asked to see the Valkyrie. You refused." There was no heat in the words, no raised voice, but each syllable landed with the weight of finality. Rasel's confidence stuttered. He forced a small laugh, uncertain. Well, we have quite a few guests. Sometimes people just browsing." She was wearing a beige hoodie. Sneakers, pregnant. The color drained slightly from Rasel's face. He did remember her. He had dismissed her. Gently, of course, professionally, but unmistakably. "I believe I may have spoken with her briefly," he said, fumbling for neutrality. "I didn't realize—" "She didn't need you to realize anything," Elijah interrupted. "She came here with the intention of purchasing that vehicle, in full, yesterday." Rasel tried to steady himself. "Dr. Weston, I'm very sorry for any misunderstanding. If I gave your wife the impression—" "You didn't give her an impression. You gave her a verdict." At that moment, the dealership's owner, Alan Grant, emerged from his upstairs office. He'd seen the arrival of the diplomatic SUV and had been watching from the balcony. Now, sensing trouble, he descended quickly, adjusting his blazer as he approached. "Good morning, gentlemen," he said smoothly. "I hope everything is all right. I'm Alan Grant, owner of Ashford Auto Gallery." Dr. Weston nodded once. "Mr. Grant, I was just informing your sales manager that my wife visited yesterday. She was not offered the courtesy or professionalism this establishment claims to uphold." Grant shot a sharp glance at Rasel, who was now clearly sweating. "I'm terribly sorry to hear that," he said quickly. "I recall seeing her, yes, but I wasn't aware of the interaction in detail. Please know that we hold ourselves to high standards, and any failure to meet those—" "My wife left without complaint," Dr. Weston said. "She didn't ask for an apology, but she did make a call." He turned his head slightly, as if observing the entire showroom. The room had gone quieter. Several staff members were watching from a distance. Even Jason stood frozen near the digital console, his face pale. "Now, I don't come here to embarrass anyone," Elijah said, looking back to Grant. "But I want it known that I had intended to purchase not just the Valkyrie, but 2 additional vehicles as gifts. And I was considering this dealership for our firm's executive fleet, 7 vehicles in total." Grant visibly flinched. Even Rasel's carefully crafted composure shattered into open disbelief. A sale of that size was not just a win, it was a record-breaking achievement. "But I don't believe this is the right place," Elijah said. "Not anymore." He turned to go. Grant stepped forward. "Please," he said, "Dr. Weston, I understand this is serious, and I agree. What happened is unacceptable. Let us make this right. Whatever you need, however we can." Elijah paused, then turned back slightly. "You can't unmake what someone chooses to reveal about themselves," he said. "My wife wasn't offended by poor service. She's lived through worse. But she noticed what you didn't. How quickly a woman of color in simple clothing is deemed unworthy of respect." He looked directly at Rasel, whose mouth opened, then closed again. "She asked me not to make this about revenge," Elijah continued. "So I won't, but I will make it about accountability." Without waiting for a reply, he walked toward the exit. The chauffeur stepped forward, opening the door. Elijah Weston entered the SUV without a word. As the vehicle pulled away, no one in the showroom spoke. The silence was not merely uncomfortable, it was condemning. Jason took a small step forward. His voice came out softer than intended, but it carried. "She was polite," he said. "She knew exactly what she wanted. He's right. We treated her like she didn't belong." Grant didn't answer. Rasel stared at the floor, his mind racing, heart pounding. Outside, the sun still shone on the glass and steel of the dealership, but inside, something had cracked. They had all just witnessed not a confrontation, but a mirror held up to their culture. And not everyone liked what they saw. For the remainder of that day, the Ashford Auto Gallery moved with the sluggish weight of a place that had just been struck by something it couldn't quite identify. The polished surfaces still gleamed. The ambient jazz still played, floating like a veneer of calm over the room. But underneath the shine and sound, tension curled in every corner. Conversations were subdued. Laughter, typically common among the sales staff, was non-existent. Even the footsteps of customers seemed quieter, more cautious, as if the showroom itself had become aware that something essential in its foundation had shifted. Rasel Jennings remained at his post, but his usual fluid confidence had deserted him. The encounter with Elijah Weston had landed with brutal clarity, and its aftershocks were only beginning to ripple outward. For a man who had spent years mastering the performance of professionalism, who had believed in his ability to manage any situation through charm and control, the quiet authority of Elijah's words had pierced something much deeper than pride. He didn't speak much for the rest of the day. He nodded at clients and feigned interest in their questions, but his thoughts looped back, again and again, to the same moment. She didn't need you to realize anything. She came here with the intention of purchasing that vehicle, in full, yesterday. At closing time, Rasel lingered long after the others had left. The Valkyrie sat silently under its soft lights, unchanged in appearance, but altered forever in meaning. It was no longer just a flagship model. It had become the center of something uncomfortable, something real. He stood in front of it, arms folded, the overhead spotlights painting cold lines along his face. The glass walls around the dealership reflected his form back at him, doubled and distorted. He didn't recognize himself in those reflections, not entirely. He had always imagined himself as a professional, someone who moved through the world with measured respect and discernment. But now he was left with a stark image of how easily those ideas could collapse when tested. When he finally left, the streets outside were quiet, the city winding down into dusk. He didn't drive home immediately. Instead, he parked in front of a small diner on the east side of town, a place he hadn't visited in years, and sat inside without ordering anything. The waitress offered him a refill on the coffee he hadn't touched. He nodded, murmured thanks, and stared out the window at nothing. That night, after finally driving home to his modest two-bedroom condo in Brookhaven, Rasel lay awake in the dark. The silence in the room was oppressive, but it couldn't smother the looping thoughts that refused to die. Who was she? He picked up his phone and began to search. It didn't take long. The name Elijah Weston brought up hundreds of results. Medical journals, conference videos, awards, keynote addresses, philanthropic ventures. Dr. Elijah Weston was one of the nation's foremost neurosurgeons, a pioneer in minimally invasive spinal reconstruction, and a vocal advocate for healthcare access in underserved communities. His wife, as it turned out, was no less accomplished, Naomi Weston. The name appeared on news sites, charity websites, even a TED Talk. She was a maternal health advocate, founder of the Georgia Alliance for Equitable Birth, a nonprofit that provided prenatal care and support to low-income mothers across the state. She had testified before Congress, launched statewide educational programs, and worked closely with hospitals to reduce maternal mortality among Black women. Her reputation in medical advocacy was described as quietly unstoppable. There were pictures, too. Images of her in hospital wards, helping new mothers, smiling with volunteers at blood drives, speaking at conferences, standing behind podiums with conviction in her eyes. But more striking than the photos were the captions, the tone of the coverage. She wasn't presented as someone who sought attention or headlines. She worked quietly, constantly, with a kind of grounded dignity that made Rasel feel, in that moment, immeasurably small. He turned the phone over and set it on the table beside him. The weight of his mistake now felt heavier than humiliation. It was shame, true and unfiltered, not just because he had misjudged a wealthy client, though the dealership had certainly taken a hit, but because for the first time in years he saw himself through someone else's eyes. Not the polished, capable salesperson, but a gatekeeper of a system built on shallow cues and unspoken exclusions. At the dealership the next morning, the air was brittle. Whispers floated from desk to desk. Everyone had heard about the Westons by now. Some had Googled, others had traded details over drinks the night before. Alan Grant had already held a closed-door meeting with the senior staff. His voice, usually measured and pleasant, had been sharp, clipped, cracking with urgency as he outlined the PR risks, the financial fallout, and the consequences of cultural blindness. Rasel listened in silence. His face remained still, but his thoughts swirled beneath the surface. After the meeting, Jason approached him. The younger man stood stiffly, arms at his sides, mouth drawn tight. "I saw what happened," he said. "Yesterday." Rasel looked up from his tablet. "I know." Jason didn't flinch. "You could have just shown her the car." There was no accusation in his voice, but no gentleness either, just plain fact. "I should have," Rasel admitted. "I didn't think—" "No," Jason interrupted, "you did think. That was the problem." The words stung, not because they were cruel, but because they were true. After Jason walked away, Rasel returned to his desk, but he couldn't focus. Every time he tried to prepare his next pitch or respond to a lead, the same tightness rose in his chest. He closed his laptop, stood, and walked outside. The air was cooler than the day before. The city was alive with movement and noise, but none of it touched him. For the first time in a long while, he didn't know what to do. That night, after long hesitation, he returned to his search for Naomi's foundation. Her nonprofit had a clean, understated website. No flashy graphics, just photos of real people. Mothers, children, nurses, volunteers. At the bottom of the page, a small link. Interested in volunteering? Click here. He stared at it, then clicked. The form was simple. Name, contact, availability. A short section, why do you want to volunteer? He stared at the blinking cursor. His fingers hovered over the keys. What could he write? That he was trying to salvage his conscience? That he didn't want to be the man he had proven himself to be? That he couldn't forget the look in Naomi's eyes as she turned to leave? After several minutes, he typed, "I'd like to understand the people I ignored for too long." He hovered, then clicked submit. 2 days later, an email arrived from the Foundation's volunteer coordinator. "Thank you for reaching out," it said. "We have a community event this weekend. You're welcome to join as a general helper, setup, logistics, guest assistance. Please arrive by 9 a.m. at the address below. Wear comfortable clothing, no fanfare, no questions, just an opportunity. When Saturday came, he nearly backed out. He stood in front of his mirror that morning for too long, unsure what to wear, as if clothes could conceal what he now knew about himself. He settled on a plain blue t-shirt and jeans, an unremarkable uniform for an unremarkable task. The event was held in the multi-purpose room of a local community center. He arrived early, not out of eagerness, but because his nerves wouldn't allow him to be late. Tables were being set up, chairs arranged, banners hung. A volunteer handed him a name tag and directed him to help unload supplies from a van. He spent the next 2 hours lifting boxes, unfolding chairs, helping carry crates of bottled water and baby formula. No one asked who he was. No one cared what he did for a living. They just worked alongside him, focused and efficient. He saw Naomi from across the room before she saw him. She was wearing a simple dress and sneakers, her hair pulled back, clipboard in hand, giving directions with calm authority. Her movements were smooth, practiced. She was clearly in charge, but not domineering. People listened to her because they respected her, not because she demanded it. When their eyes finally met, there was no visible reaction in her face. She approached slowly. "You came," she said. He nodded. "I wasn't sure if you would," she added. "I wasn't sure either." They stood in silence for a moment, surrounded by volunteers moving with purpose. "I owe you an apology," he said. "I said all the right things that day, or I tried to, but none of it mattered. I treated you like you didn't belong." She studied him, not unkindly. "I've been treated worse," she said, "but that doesn't mean it didn't matter." He swallowed. "I know. That's why I'm here." Naomi nodded slowly. "Then let's get to work." She walked away, calling out an instruction to another volunteer. He followed, and for the first time in years, Rasel Jennings wasn't the one leading, performing, or closing. He was simply present. And it was enough. The ballroom of the Grand Hyatt Atlanta was almost unrecognizable. Where chandeliers once illuminated polished floors reserved for galas and black-tie fundraisers, long tables now stood covered in materials for children's activities, therapy stations, photo displays, and panels highlighting stories of resilience. Volunteers moved purposefully through the large space, adjusting banners, placing welcome packets, and arranging folding chairs. Bright posters lined the walls, showcasing the work of the Georgia Alliance for Equitable Birth and the children and families they served. It was the evening of the annual foundation benefit, but the atmosphere was less about glamour and more about presence, being seen, being heard, and being valued. In the corner of the room, Rasel Jennings straightened a stack of name tags. He wore a simple gray staff t-shirt with the foundation's logo across the chest and a plastic lanyard clipped to his collar. He looked almost unrecognizable to those who had known him as the sharply dressed, steel-nerved manager of Ashford Auto Gallery. Gone were the cufflinks and tailored blazers, the polished loafers and subtle colognes. In their place stood a man quieter, more measured, and strangely at ease in simplicity. The weeks following his volunteer sign-up had been a blur of activity, each shift drawing him deeper into a world he had never taken the time to notice before. What had begun as a quiet act of penance had, with surprising speed, become something more. He had packed boxes for supply drives, driven food to low-income clinics, handed out diapers at community fairs, and listened, really listened, to women whose stories carried more weight than he could have imagined. He had seen the relief in their eyes when someone offered help without judgment, and the invisible tension that lifted when they were treated with dignity. Most of all, he had learned to be still. Still enough to hear what went unsaid. Still enough to accept that his understanding of people, once so arrogantly confident, had been narrow and incomplete. Now, as guests began to arrive for the evening's celebration, he moved among them not as an outsider, but as a quiet part of the machinery. He directed people toward the elevator, helped guide a young boy in a wheelchair away from a carpet bump, and reassured a nervous mother that the kids' corner had trained staff present. He had learned names, remembered faces, and the people he helped now no longer looked past him. They looked to him. Across the room, Naomi Weston floated from group to group, speaking with her usual blend of grace and intent. She wore a simple navy dress and low heels, and her natural curls were pulled into a soft bun at the base of her neck. She looked, as always, both calm and in control. But every now and then, when her gaze caught a particular family or longtime supporter, her composure softened into something warmer. She hadn't spoken much to Rasel over the past few weeks, though their paths crossed often during events and meetings. When they did speak, the conversations were short but sincere. There had been no need for dramatic reconciliations, no forced closeness. The distance had become a mutual understanding. Words were easy, change was hard, and trust required time. Tonight, however, as she made her way through the mingling crowd, she spotted him adjusting a portable mic stand near the stage. She paused for a moment, then crossed the room toward him. "You're early," she said, her tone light. "I figured I'd mess up the mic again," he replied with a small smile. "So I gave myself extra time." She nodded, watching him work. "How are you finding the experience?" she asked. He looked up at her. "Humbling," he said after a pause, "and necessary." She didn't respond right away. Instead, she scanned the room, watching a group of children coloring at a table, their laughter drifting through the air. "Thomas seems to like you," she said, gesturing toward the boy in the wheelchair, who was now trying to balance a juice box between his elbow and chin. "He's teaching me how to shoot free throws," Rasel said. "Apparently, I'm hopeless." A real smile flickered across her lips. "He's honest, at least." "He is," Rasel said, glancing toward the boy with genuine fondness. "And he trusts people fast, but only when they've earned it." Naomi turned her gaze back to him, more serious now. "You know, I've heard a lot of apologies in my life, some genuine, some performative. But what matters isn't the apology, it's what people do afterward." He nodded slowly. "I know, and I'm not trying to prove anything, I just couldn't go back to pretending." She studied him. There was no self-pity in his voice, no need for reassurance, just truth. "Good," she said, "because this work isn't about making anyone feel better. It's about making things better." As she turned to go, another voice joined the room, deep and warm, unmistakable. "There you are." Dr. Elijah Weston entered the ballroom with a grace that matched his wife's, dressed in a dark gray suit and a subtle blue tie. He made his way over, placing a gentle hand on Naomi's shoulder before glancing at Rasel. "Jennings," he said with a slight nod, "I hear you've become something of a fixture here." Rasel straightened instinctively, but met the man's gaze evenly. "I've been doing what I can." Elijah's expression remained unreadable for a moment, then softened. "I've seen it," he said, "and so has Naomi." Rasel exhaled, the tension in his chest loosening. "I'm grateful," he said quietly. Elijah looked across the room. "This is good work, important work. Most people don't realize how easily lives can be changed with consistency. Not grand gestures, just showing up. I understand that now, Rasel said. Finally. There was a beat of silence before Elijah added, almost casually, Daniel tells me you've been mentoring him. Rasel looked surprised. He's sharp, just needed a reason to believe in his instincts. I'm glad to hear that, Elijah said, because I might have another opportunity for you. He paused, letting the words hang between them. Remember that fleet I mentioned? Rasel blinked. The executive vehicles? We didn't go through with it. At the time, it didn't feel right, Elijah said. But we're in the market again, and Daniel speaks highly of you. The implication landed with clarity. The opportunity, once lost, was being offered again, not as a reward, but as a measure of trust regained. I'd be honored, Rasel said, his voice firm. Naomi smiled faintly, but said nothing. Instead, she turned toward the podium, where staff were preparing for her opening remarks. Later, as the evening unfolded, Rasel watched from the side of the room as Naomi took the stage. The room hushed around her. She spoke of mothers with no safe place to give birth, of infants who didn't make it to their first birthday, of volunteers, clinics, and buses driven into neighborhoods others forgot. But she also spoke of hope, of what happens when people listen, when institutions change, when dignity is no longer a luxury. Her words were steady, unwavering. The applause that followed rose not in a burst, but in a wave, deep and sustained. Afterward, guests milled about, donations were pledged, and laughter returned to the room. Thomas rolled over to Rasel, grinning. You still owe me a rematch, he said. I know, Rasel replied, crouching down, and I've been practicing. Thomas squinted. That's what they all say. As they laughed, Elijah approached once more, this time with a clipboard. Shall we go over those vehicle specs? He asked. Rasel stood, still smiling. Absolutely. As the two men moved to a quieter corner, the ballroom continued to glow with life. Naomi, surrounded by children and families, moved among them not as a symbol, but as a participant. And Rasel, once the man who measured worth by clothing and posture, now understood something far greater. That real value wasn't displayed in a showroom. It was built, patiently, humbly, in the spaces where dignity was given room to grow. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Check out our other videos for more powerful narratives, and don't forget to share this one with someone who needs to hear it.